Could you maybe
Sure.
share a little bit about how you began to follow the Lord and what led you into ministry?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home, so I had a running start, and uh, our family was Christian Reformed, and then in the tiny town that I grew up in, there was a Reformed church that my grandparents went to, and so we started visiting there, primarily because my dad was the superintendent of the public school, and at the Christian Reformed church, all the kids went to Muskegon Christian, and so we were like the only family that didn't go to that school, and so that always made it a different kind of inclusion. And so at the Reformed church, all those kids went to the public school, and so that's how we got involved. And we have a camp that the Reformed church runs called Camp Geneva, and at that camp is where I received Christ and began to follow him more, intentionally, and went from high school to college at Hope College in Holland. And then my senior year, I actually, by way of not having a high enough GPA and some other things that I tried, almost by default, I went to seminary. But once I was in it, it was like definitely the right thing, and it felt good and fit well, and enjoyed those years. And Terry and I met. We both went to Hope, but we didn't know each other at Hope. She was a couple years ahead of me, but we met at Camp Geneva, and then we got married, and have been in Kalamazoo actually ever since. So we came here my senior year of seminary, and have been here now 34 years. So
Wow.
that's a little bit of our journey.
Well, that's pretty amazing to
Yeah.
have that long of a ministry and doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, just theologically, of course, I know the Reformed kind of label, but what other labels would you maybe claim and use to describe where you stand theologically?
Yeah, I would say that, within like the Reformed Church in America,
Sure.
Centerpoint would find herself in a bit more of what might be considered the conservative camp,
Mm-hmm.
but not as conservative as another part of the Reformed Church. So we would be, a little bit more middle of the road within the conservative side. I mean, one way of maybe expressing that is that we have women in leadership roles that
Okay.
there are Reformed churches that they're it's up to each individual Reformed church to decide on that issue.
Okay.
And so even within our classes here, there's 3 churches that do not have women in leadership, and the rest of them do. Yeah, but we take the Bible very seriously, and believe in the authority of Scripture. We believe in all the gifts of the expression of the Spirit,
Okay.
but we're surely not a charismatic church. So in function, people might think that we don't believe in some of the more sensational gifts, but we believe that they're present. They're just not, like, that wouldn't happen in a worship service where
Sure.
someone would be speaking in tongues, for instance.
Okay.
So it's more kind of behind the scenes. Whereas in a true charismatic church, you would kind of expect that.
Sure.
So those are a few of the things that might describe where we kind of land theologically.
What do you think about, I mean, the term evangelical? Would you be comfortable with that? I mean, I know that term's kind of a loaded one today, but.
No, I think we would be.
Yeah.
I think technically the Reformed Church in America is a mainline denomination.
Sure.
But I think we would adhere ourselves more to an evangelical thought.
Yeah.
We're not just about denominational things, and so forth.
Yeah. So specifically, I was wanting to talk a little bit about the church growth movement and Willow Creek, and I know you guys have kind of been the satellite location for their leadership summit,
Yep.
and done that. I mean, how has that whole ministry, that way of thought, how has that influenced you in ministry?
Yeah, I mean the Willow Creek model, even within itself, has changed.
Sure.
I don't think they follow the formula of a believer service and a seeker service, and we never made that distinction. We always felt that our designation would be more of being seeker friendly, but not seeker driven,
Hmm.
and that we view worship as primarily for the saints and secondarily for those who are not yet saved, that we just want to use language and other things that could be barriers, clothing, those kinds of things we try to um, make more common so that there's less barriers that people might have if they're unchurched. So I'd say that the movement has certainly impacted us from that
Hmm.
standpoint. Um, you know, trying to understand more of what unchurched people are thinking and what they're interested in, and making efforts to try to reach unreached people groups
Hmm.
is to use missiological language is what we talk about now quite a bit. I don't We don't use the language of seekers very much anymore in our
Yeah.
kind of vocabulary, and it's more about who isn't getting the gospel in our local context. And so, like, we just recently invested in some special needs equipment and a full-time person to try to get into that people group that are not being reached in our community. So that you know, but I think that way of thinking, Willow definitely influenced us in, and the leadership summit has been very instrumental in our desire to have a leadership culture. It plays a pretty significant role in that, and has helped us a lot in training leaders and staff primarily, but
Hmm.
certainly others beyond staff too.
Sure. Yeah. Now, I mean, maybe you could sum up a little bit. What would you say is the approach to leadership that sort of that you pick up, coming from something like Willow, as opposed to, say, maybe what a traditional church might have, or the approach they might take?
Yeah, I mean the summit is a very unique kind of product because the philosophy is using people of different disciplines, from academics to military, the athletic arena,
Mhm.
um, certainly business, and then also church. And that the theory is that we can all learn from these different avenues where leadership is necessary, and to cross pollinate with one another. And I just think that's been a really uh, a helpful approach in a more robust and wide bandwidth of where we're getting learnings from, as well as giving us, it's easier to get a business person to come to an event that there's going to be some other business talks that are a part of that
Mhm.
than if it's just, all pastors that are speaking on leadership. And
Sure.
vice versa. It's good that it isn't all business, or it might be harder to get some of the pastors and churches involved in it.
Hmm. There any things that you would say maybe you've that were a weakness in kind of the Willow Creek model, or that whole approach to ministry, or
Um,
maybe some way that you got something you guys have tried that you kind of gave up on or turned away from or anything like that?
Uh, that's a good question. I think in and of themselves, Willow has critiqued the whole seeker-driven model, and
Right.
the reveal studies that started a few, I don't know, maybe a decade ago now, showed that the fruitfulness of a discipled life was not happening very well in that kind of an environment, and why they made some of those changes. But we ourselves had never, given ourselves to the whole seeker-driven model, and I think it does lack some, um, you know, putting all your eggs in the basket of trying to appeal to someone who doesn't know Christ, and gearing all of your ministry around that. Just if you just think about that very long, you can tell why it would have some of its weaknesses in discipling believers. I mean, that just makes, intuitive sense that there would be some handicap with that.
Yeah. How how do you think that I mean, maybe talk a little bit about your approach to preaching and kind of how you see that in terms of connecting with people, maybe unchurched people, and
Yeah.
just how you approach it.
hmm Well, again, we try to assume that there's people, and there are, in the room that don't know Christ and are very Bible light. And sometimes oftentimes I prepare with a couple of people in mind that I personally know who haven't yet made a commitment to Christ or are barely over the line. And how can I say things that don't make them feel uh, excluded, or that they're less than? And so, uh, simple phrase things like, yeah, that book of the Bible is in the Old Testament. When you get to Psalms, turn right, and you're going to find it pretty quickly,
Sure.
rather than just assuming that everybody knows where all the 66 books are. And that sort of a thing is a part of that approach. That also helps. Andy Stanley writes about this in a chapter in his book, Deep and Wide, where he talks about double-barreled preaching, where you're trying to keep both audiences in mind while you're, in a text. And he uses and this is really true, that if you know that there is someone in the room, or you imagine that there is someone in the room when you're talking about a particular subject. Let's say, like, we lease our lower level to a couple of Muslim students, and I knew a fair amount about Islam from book study. But when I'm actually talking to Sultan and to Ryan about our different faiths, my approach is much less dogmatic and more curious and gentle, because they know I'm a pastor and I'm twice as old as they are, and we have this mutual respect with each other. And just trying to bring that same approach into the pulpit, that if I am teaching on Islam, or Islam's being mentioned, I think, Sultan, how would he hear this? Am I unnecessarily pushing someone away, not negating the truth of the matter, but saying it in a fashion that is heard maybe a little differently than how I might have approached things 10 years ago, where I was less concerned, or at least less aware of how I might be coming across to someone who's sitting on the other side of an issue. That's certainly true when I teach from time to time on homosexuality, and we're a conservative church on that issue, as the Bible is, but we got quite a few parents whose kids are gay, and how do I help them to know that they're loved and valued and that their kids matter, and um, while still holding on to the tenets of the faith. I think there's ways of doing that. It's just um, being more aware of posture, gesture, some of the softer skills of preaching that um, trying not to unnecessarily alienate people, and just let the gospel itself do whatever. You can't you can't soft sell the reality that we're sinners and we need a savior. So
That's good.
that's that. I mean, let that be where the rubber hits the road, I guess. Let that be the offense, I guess. If
Yeah,
there's
that's good. Um, so, I mean, maybe kind of from a more general standpoint, when you think of how the church relates to the world, um, I mean, to what degree should we, or what ways should we be separate? What ways should we integrate and use things from the world or accept the world? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, I'm probably going to be um, much more in the camp of um, if we if we pull away from the world, we lose our salt and light opportunities, and that um, we we need that influence in order to have a voice into culture, and we need to steward that in a wise and judicious fashion. And we lose ground when we do several things. One is um, circle up the wagons and kind of protect ourselves, and try not to be contaminated by the world. That kind of overall strategy. And then secondarily, when um, we we do stupid things that where we lose our voice because we're too much like the world. And I'm thinking right now of like some of the responses on social media,
Yeah.
and have we lost our ability to speak civilly with one another? And do you not realize that you're still a Christian even if you're
Right.
behind a computer screen? And that lack of civility, again, loses influence, and also doesn't speak well of the fruit of the Spirit that should be the mark of all of our lives in Christ. And that should never make a difference whether we're on screen or we're in person with someone. Part of the Reformed kind of basic perception of culture too is that there isn't any separation between sacred and secular. And so our posture would be to train our people on how to receive some of the onslaught of cultural crud, and um, how do you equip yourself to be able to buffet that in a way that you are not getting sucked down into the vortex of all of that, but you're able to keep your head above the waterline and still use your position and your influence and your placement in culture in your neighborhood and your place of employment and so forth in a way that honors Christ and gets the gospel to the people that need it most. We're talking a lot in these days about vocational discipleship, and how can we work with other like-minded Jesus followers in our places of employment and in our neighborhoods. A little less about Centerpoint Church and more about the church that you bring at Stryker, at Bronson, at Western, wherever you might be, and how can we work better with other Jesus followers in order to be a strengthened witness in those environments.
That's good. Um, so then, I mean, in terms of like, it sounds like you would be pretty pretty reticent to be real vocal in any political sense. Is that an accurate take on
Yeah, I mean,
navigate that?
Centerpoint is a strongly Republican church, but that doesn't mean that there aren't Democrats that are a part of the church too. And we are also trying to reach into younger generations more effectively. And we know that just sheer statistically, that younger generations tend to trend towards voting Democratic. And so we're really slow to bring much into the pulpit in relation to politics. The one area that we probably, well, we consistently speak the same message is we use the language that we are unapologetically pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I personally, not everybody agrees with this, but I personally don't feel like I need to say much more than that, that we are for life in all ages, that we believe in legislation that would control and even to prohibit abortion on demand. We don't believe you can make a biblical case for abortion on demand. But I wouldn't go as far as what some of our folks would say. People who are the pro-life, these people are not stupid. They can value for them. I don't think I need to go beyond what just saying that that's one of our positions. That, and then we try to voice that too by saying this isn't a political issue first, it's a moral issue first and foremost, and a biblical issue, and therefore we feel like it's something that we can speak openly about without too much pushback. And I haven't heard much from our, I mean, every once in a while I'll get one of our Democrats that will say, you make it sound very like there's no other option. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but biblically, I just don't see it. I don't know how you make a case for the Democratic platform of abortion on demand. I mean, you have to work with that, not me. I mean, so.
And then I guess any thoughts on how, when it comes to meeting needs and alleviating poverty, that sort of thing. I mean, how do you balance that with evangelism and the gospel? How do those go together in your view?
Yeah, I would say that we're quite holistic in how we see the gospel, that people need bread and they need the bread of life. So they need both. And, trying to meet people where they're currently at and hopefully lead them towards maybe beginning with their felt needs and then bring them towards, what are their deeper needs. We've gotten, I would say, more nimble in being able to address what we see going on in the city. One example of that is two examples. One is that we were reading about how the Kalamazoo Promise, is a pull strategy at the end of the spectrum of a student's life, but the Promise does not have as many graduates as they want. I mean, they're getting more that are amongst minorities. It's only a 15% graduation rate from that start the Promise and don't finish it. That's not good. And so with greater research, we discovered that actually starting children at preschool level and kind of jump starting their learning process is one of the better strategies towards getting them to take advantage of the Promise all the way through. And one of the unique markets that we could then give ourselves to was to expand our preschool program, which it really isn't a good option for us to go beyond preschool because we have a lot of Kalamazoo Christian folk at Centerpoint, and it would not make sense for us to provide Christian education beyond that. But we can get to expand that arena in order to try to meet a need in our city, and we provide scholarships for those that can't afford the tuition. And then a second thing that we did this year was we launched these learning hubs when we discovered that 30% of the kids in the urban areas were not opening a notebook during COVID. And partly probably because they don't have internet access, and partly because of a lack of adult supervision. So at both of our campuses, we have these Monday, Wednesday, Friday, these learning hubs where students can come to a safe area. They can have some adult supervision, they have internet, and they can get their work done in some community that's safe. And so those were a couple things where we tried to respond to what we saw needs in the city. And with a preschool, I mean, that's a full-blown Christian based deal, and people know that on the front end. The learning hubs, it's more or less, they're all Christians that are giving some of the adult supervision, but the curriculum itself is driven by whether it's Portage or Kalamazoo Public or whatever, class that they are a part of.
Sure. Well, I think that pretty much covers all the questions I had, but yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah.